Welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
My name is Carter Mackey.
And this is episode 29, where we're talking about the game of fighting off those nasty imperialists who are on your island, Spirit Island. But before we get there, we're going to start as we always do with the news. Our first bit of news this week is that AEG has a re-release deluxe edition of their deck building game, Valley of the Kings, going up on Kickstarter on April 2nd. This is going to contain all three sort of standalone games in the series that could be combined together if you want to. It has solo rules and divider cards and player powers, and I've never played this game, but it gets a lot of love because it's supposed to be a pretty innovative deck builder. You're basically supposed to be trying to collect all the best things to take with you into your sarcophagus when you die.
That sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great theme for a game. So if you're interested at all in Ancient Egypt or just want another deck building game in your collection, check out the Valley of the Kings from AEG on Kickstarter. Our second bit of news for this week is that Bellwether Games, the makers of Mars Open and Coldwater Crown, both of which we have reviewed on this podcast, they have a new game out on Kickstarter right now called Freshwater Fly. This is a game about fly fishing, of all things, that is a dice drafting rondelle game where the wheel of your fly pole is the rondelle. And this is not the sort of theme that just jumps out and grabs me, but I do appreciate that somebody is out there making a unique theme for a board game, and it looks like it's being done really well.
Yeah, it looks really good, but I'm so surprised that you're not into fly fishing. You grew up in East Tennessee. Shouldn't you be home at these rivers full of trout?
Yeah, I just did not actually go outside very much as a kid.
Oh.
I'm sure that's surprising to you. Yeah, and you, I'm sure, were an avid outdoorsman as a child.
Yeah, but it was more just playing with like sticks and dirt.
Yeah. So you didn't use the stick to try to catch a fish?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, this isn't really the game for us, probably, but it might be the game for you. And it does contain solo play in the box. So if you are at all interested in Freshwater Fly, that is on Kickstarter right now. Our last bit of news for this week is a little bit different than what we normally do. It's about a geek list on Board Game Geek. So I think I've mentioned on this show before, there's a great geek list called Games with Automa Opponents for Solo Play on Board Game Geek. And that contains a whole list of official variants that contain Automa opponents, as opposed to like a beat your own score type thing, and a list of user-created solo variants that have Automas for them. It's a great place to go and find out if your game is playable solo, even if it doesn't have an official variant. So if you haven't checked that out, you definitely should. But the real reason I'm including this here is because there is sort of a spin-off geek list that's been created this week called Digital Automas by Gavin McGruddy. And what Gavin has managed to do is he is taking some of these user-created and official variants, and he's making them into a cool, simple, easy-to-use online format. So, if you don't want to get out your deck of Automa cards for viticulture, for instance, you can go on here and use the website, which is really neat. But the cooler thing to me is if you want to try out one of the user-created variants for games like Great Western Trail or Near and Far or any of the other games that you might have in your collection but you've never tried to play solo because you didn't want to print everything out, you can go do that now very easily. It's just a really interesting project to me.
Yeah, it's just a really cool, I think, idea to do something, and it's great that he's doing it.
Yeah, it's very simple, very clean to use. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like apps or mixing electronics with their board game, but honestly, if you can get past that, it's a much easier way to do this. Anybody who's ever tried to cut out and paste up cards knows how obnoxious that can be. If you're at all interested, check out the Digital Automa's Geek List by Gavin McGruddy on Board Game Geek. And that's all we've got for the news this week, so we're going to get right into our review, which is for Spirit Island, one of our most requested reviews on this show. Spirit Island comes to us from designer R. Eric Roos, and from what I can tell, this is his only game, which is insane. We'll get to that in just a little bit. And it comes from publisher Greater Than Games in 2017 and plays 1 to 4 players. In Spirit Island, players are going to play spirits on an island, as the title suggests. And this island is at the distant reaches of the world, and the great powers of Europe are going to begin to stretch their colonial empires further and further into the world, and eventually they come to your island. they're inevitably going to try to lay claim to a place where the spirits on that island still hold power. And when they do, you're going to fight back alongside the islanders who live there. So this is a co-op game where you play a spirit trying to drive the white imperialist settlers off your island, which is so cool.
It's such a cool, unique theme. I remember when I first heard about it, I was just really excited about the theme because it's so silly and ridiculous, but I love it.
Oh man, I love it too. This is definitely the first thing that grabbed me about this game. The cover is really cool and evocative and interesting, but I saw it and thought it was neat and passed on it to look at other things. But when I heard what the game was about, I was immediately hooked. There are so many games about colonization. There are so few where you get to beat up on the colonizers. And the thing is, the theme in this game is incredibly strong, even though the components on the face of it don't look like that much.
No, I won't say I dislike the way the components look. I don't like the way the board looks. It just doesn't work for me. It's not exciting at all, but it's still so much fun to play.
Yeah, it has this board that's cut out into kind of a strange shape where the pieces fit together to form the island, and the graphic design and the artwork on one side of the board is sort of a realistic looking island, but it's very hard to tell for me where one section ends and the other begins. It's not necessarily very clear. The other side for me is definitely the side to play, but it's not very interesting to look at.
They're simple patterns for what land type it is for that space, but it's not particularly interesting, and it reads really clear and is very effective at what it does. But I don't know, it has like this stitching kind of imagery between them. It just doesn't work for me personally, but it works for the game.
It looks to me like an abstract game when you set it out on the table.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I mean, even the little buildings for the towns and the cities and the explorers, I mean, they look good. They're not bad at all, but they look pretty plain. And it really isn't until you start to play the game that you appreciate how much thoughtfulness I think went into these components and their creation. And so this is where I'm going to compliment this game in a way that I really can't compliment others. So the buildings themselves, for instance, for the towns and the cities, they look pretty plain, but the rulebook specifically states that when a town or a city takes damage, and you can do that in this game, cities have 3 health points, towns have 2, the pieces are designed so that you can lay them on the side and see one section of the piece or 2 sections of the piece standing up to remind you how many health points the town or the city has, which is wild to me. Or the little wooden pieces that are used for the Dahan, the native peoples in this game. They look like little huts that populate the board, and they can very easily be flipped over to show them how many health points they have left. Even the way the board looks, even though it's just, each section is a solid color with a very faint texture behind it, the texture allows colorblind folks to more easily distinguish between the different sections on the board.
Yeah, I mean, I would say with all the components, everything feels really well thought out. Like, it's all super functional. It's not something I love about some of the graphic design, but it doesn't hurt it at all. And I mean, even just the way that everything fits in the box with the inserts they have, it's all very well thought out.
Yeah, I guess that's where I would land too. The forms they have chosen aren't aesthetically beautiful, but they are incredibly functional. And I appreciate that. It's almost like a piece of art in just how functional it is and how well it serves the rest of the game. I don't feel the theme in the components so much, but it works.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the components for this game are good. And I would say the same thing about the rulebook. The rulebook is very clearly laid out. Lots of examples of play, good visuals throughout. It's not the sort of thing that wowed me. And to be honest, I've not had to go back through it and look a bunch of things up. And so I don't know how it functions as a reference book for most people. But I can say that I haven't had to go back and look things up, right? Which is a pretty nice compliment to a rulebook and one that I don't often have to give. The rules are lengthy. I mean, 25, 26 pages for a co-op game.
And they're large pages.
But it didn't take me long to get through each page because so much of it was visual and example. And all the rules make sense with the theme of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. The theme definitely undergirds it, I feel like, all the way through.
Yeah, absolutely. So that means that you're going to be spending a little bit of time reading the rulebook for this game. And then before you know it, you'll be jumping into play. And the play for this game is unlike anything else that has hit my table.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I really, really, really like this game.
Man, me too. This is so interesting because all the spirits that you're going to play in this game are so different. You might play the spirit of the earth or a spirit of shadows or a spirit of fear. And just saying it like that makes them sound kind of bland and one-dimensional. And they all are definitely focused, I would say. But the artwork on the boards and the powers themselves make them feel like they have a personality.
Oh, I mean, just the names of the spirits. I mean, you're using just general effective references for them.
Right, yes. Yeah, but shadows flicker like flames, or lightning swift strike, or my favorite, ocean's hungry grasp.
Yeah. Man, it's so great.
It's so good. And the thing that I'll probably say so many times during this review is that everything about the spirits is incredibly thematic.
Yes.
From the beginning, you have this phase where you're trying to pick your growth option on the board. So the game is going to alternate between your spirit extending its influence across the island and picking what powers it's going to use on its turn, and the invaders coming and just popping up like weeds all over this island and ravaging the land. And so you need to pick out powers and growth options at the beginning of each phase that allow you to prepare for what's coming next without ever fully knowing what to expect. And all of the growth options for each of these and all of their powers feel so cool to use.
They all feel cool. They all just reinforce how you would expect a spirit like that to operate, whichever one you chose, whether or not you're the ocean and you're ebbing and flowing along the coast and just wreaking havoc there. If you're the shadows flicker like flame or whatever it's called and just like popping up all over and inciting fear with like smaller encampment. I mean, it's awesome.
It is. And one of the things that I really like about this is, you're spreading your influence across the island with these little discs. And so there's a sense in which this game is about territory control. I mean, you're basically trying to spread your influence across the island and to make sure that the invaders don't get rid of it. But the game isn't about controlling those spaces. It's not like a King of the Hill style area control game. Putting down your influence allows you to use these power cards to do really cool things to drive the settlers away. You start with a deck of cards, or a hand of cards, I guess, that's unique to your spirit. And over the course of the game, you're going to, during your growth phase where you get to spread your influence, you'll have the option to get more powers. Minor powers at first that do still really cool things, but maybe cost a little bit more for the amount of damage or fear that they cause. And then over the course of the game, you'll have the option to trade out some of those for major powers, where suddenly you feel like a monster. One of the things that this game does best for me is that sense of growth and change, not only throughout the game, but even round to round.
I mean, the way you acquire cards is you draw 4, and then you get to choose one, which is nice because it helps. I feel like that's a good, healthy selection and choice. And so your deck is just getting bigger and bigger that you're getting to use, and you're kind of sculpting that. And then, like you said, when you ever decide to get the major cards, the idea of trading one of your minor cards back in and then upgrading it basically with this major power, I don't know, like you said, that progression of power feels so good.
It does. And not only does the progression feel good because you're doing more powerful things, but you're doing powerful things in different and interesting ways as you grow. So, you might expect just to do more damage, for instance, with a more powerful card.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the best cards in this game maybe do allow you to attack and do damage to settlers, and which does feel cool, but it feels just as cool to be able to defend an area from a settler by just plopping down one card and saying, you all aren't going to be able to do anything here this turn.
Right.
Or there are power cards that interact really well with other players, even if you're playing solo, controlling multiple spirits, that say, you can get 1 or 2 energy this turn, or you can target your opponent with this power. But if you target your opponent, they get 3 energy.
Mm-hmm.
It like incentivizes you to use your powers to help your teammates,
mm-hmm.
which makes for a really compelling multiplayer experience. But also, if you're playing solo, it just gives you one more thing to think about. Plus, you can use your cards, this is one of my favorite things, to instill fear in the settlers.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the best parts of this game is you can win by just eliminating everybody from the board.
Which is challenging.
Which is very challenging. It can be done, but it's very difficult to do. Or you can make the end goal of the game easier by instilling fear in the settlers' hearts. So you start the game where all the settlers are feeling confident, so you've got to completely wipe them out to win. But after you've scared them quite a bit, maybe you just need to get rid of their towns and cities. Maybe you don't have to get rid of the settlers themselves. Or maybe you just really scare the daylights out of them and you don't have to get rid of anything. You just scare them off the island entirely.
Right, which all of that can make the game sound almost easy, but it's far from it. The invaders are constantly exploring and moving into new spaces. They're building new towns and cities, which are so they're expanding and becoming more powerful in those spaces they're already at. And then they're ravaging the land, which can kill the natives, blight the island, which you have a health of the island, and it gets too blighted, you lose the game. If all of your influence gets taken off by them ravaging the land, you lose the game. And then time can just run out, and you lose the game.
Yeah, and that can happen very quickly.
Right. I would say there's been several games that I feel like, I don't know, handily won, but like I won and I felt very satisfied by it. There was maybe like 2 turns left in the game, maybe.
Oh yeah, it feels to me when I win this game like it always feels like a nail biter, even though it isn't necessarily. I may not be that close to the end of the deck, but it feels like if I do anything wrong, if there's any misstep at all, then suddenly I'm set back another 2 or 3 turns.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So the time running out thing is a very big deal. And so the invaders are incredibly powerful, but you are also incredibly powerful. And what I love about that is that makes this game not swingy necessarily, but dramatic. I mean,
Absolutely.
Swingy indicates randomness in a way that this doesn't really have, but it does always feel exciting and tense. And because the invaders build up so much, when you're able to pull off a combo with your powers, you feel so powerful.
Absolutely. When you have just a really great turn and you're able to clear a lot of the island or just some things cascade together, I don't know. It's so satisfying.
It is. And because you've got all that pressure from the invaders, you really spend a lot of time on your turn thinking through how you're going to play your cards because, you've got the printed text on the cards themselves that you get to enact. But the trick is you have fast powers and slow powers. And your fast powers are going to activate before the invaders take their turn and try to blight the land. And so you can see how they're set up to do that, and you can try to intervene and prevent them by defending the land or wiping out enough of them that they can't do any damage. But those powers aren't usually as powerful as the slow powers. And those you have to wait to enact until after they've taken their turn. And by that point, they could have already blighted the land. And so you've got that decision to make. Plus, all of your cards have these icons on the side that show you like what elements they're associated with. And you want to play cards from your hand that allow you to get enough symbols of the right type that you can use your spirit's innate powers that are printed on the board. And those things can be incredibly powerful.
Right. And there's normally different levels for those. So if you only have a couple of the elements that you need of the symbols, you do a low power version of that power. But just as you get a bigger deck, you're able to play more cards per turn. That power progressively gets more powerful. Yeah, it feels great.
It basically means like you are not deck building necessarily, but handcrafting in a way throughout the game. When you draft powers, whenever you get a new minor power or major power, you look at the text on the card and think, oh man, this is so cool. I would love to have this in my hand. Except then you realize, but this only has one of the symbols that I need to pull off my innate powers. Maybe this other one that doesn't strike me as cool necessarily, but would still be helpful in its own way, would allow me to pull off my innate powers. And then basically you are looking for ways to build combos because you can chain things together in this game in ways that are incredibly satisfying. And so all of that comes together to create these dramatic turns where you're building up for what bad thing the invaders are going to do. You're trying to intervene with your powers. You're trying to plan ahead with your slow powers. And then in the midst of all this are the natives of this land, the Dahan. And this is one of the most fascinating elements to this game because the Dahan start on the board and there are plenty of them. It looks like they're doing fine on this island until the settlers came along, which, spoiler alert, is the case all throughout history. But you as the spirits can push or gather the Dahan into places to keep them out of harm's way, to keep them from being hurt by the invaders. Or you can gather them into places where the invaders are so that when they attack, the Dahan rise up and attack them back and destroy their towns and cities. That seemed to me like a small thing when I first started playing the game because my spirit didn't particularly interact with the Dahan. But there are other spirits in the game that their whole thing is manipulating the movement of these peoples across the board. And thematically, that's cool. Like the spirits that are tied to their land are urging them into places that allow them to protect their island. And that's a cool idea. But also just strategically and tactically, it is so rich and adds a really cool layer to the game.
Yeah, you're just constantly thinking of just, like when you say you want to protect them, it's not because you even necessarily have something in mind, but you know that there might be a clutch moment in the future where you could move them in, use your powers to defend them, and then they can just wipe out all the invaders.
It's hard to illustrate just how cool that is when you pull it off, but maybe this would help. So I was playing a spirit called Ocean's Hungry Grasp, which is basically just the ocean swallowing up settlers by luring them into its depths and drowning them, or by reaching its influence out like a tsunami or a high tide or something and pulling them in. And it's this really cool, rich thematic power. Well, I happened to get a power called Tsunami that was basically going to let me wipe out all the characters on the board in the coastal lands, which is really neat, except that I had a lot of Dahan there, and I didn't want them to die, and I realized I had this other power in my hand that would allow me to gather them into a nearby space, and that kept them safe from the tide, and also that was going to put them into a position to rise up against the settlers that same round and destroy their city. And it's just got this cool combo chain type feel that is really not in many co-op games that I have found.
Yeah, normally, I mean, I'm trying to think of co-op games. Sometimes there might be like one or two big moments. I feel like you're not having big moments necessarily every single turn, but they come pretty frequently. And I feel like the better you get at the game, the more you play it, the more you are kind of consistently able to really maximize and feel like you're just squeezing out every bit of like power and ability that you can.
Yes, absolutely. And because all of the spirits are so different, that means that every game is going to feel different for you because it's all about maximizing your power and using it to the best of your ability. But because they're so different, you're just going to have wildly different experiences. So, for instance, there's this amazing spirit called the Bringer of Dreams and Nightmares who just looks heavy metal rad. And he can't actually destroy anyone, which is so difficult to manage because the settlers just keep spreading and spreading and spreading. But every point of damage he would do to them, he causes in fear instead. And so if he was by himself, he would be almost impossible to win with. But in concert with other players, he is incredibly powerful. And playing the game as that spirit feels wildly different than playing the river surges in Sunlight or the ocean's hungry grasp. What's so neat about that system is the core rules don't change. The core rules are so simple, but because the designers can manipulate the spirit boards so easily, the game can feel wildly different playing a spirit, meaning they can just design lots of spirits for this game, and you have near limitless replayability.
Yeah, that is one thing that, I mean, it's part of the reason I love Root so much too, is just there's this really solid core game, and there's this one thing that's easy to iterate on the outside. You know, in Root is the different factions or whatever they're called, different groups. And in this is the different spirits. And the spirits take on a completely different character in a lot of ways, and just how their innate powers are, what their passive powers are, what cards they start with, the way that they expand and grow in power. Like, it's just, they're all very different, and you have to play them all very different. And it just makes for like a new experience every time you pick a different spirit.
And that means then that if all you ever did was put down the island tiles and play with a different spirit, you would have a different experience every game. And even if you play with the same spirit again, you're going to have a rich experience because you're going to learn that character a little better, and you'll have a different selection of power cards to deal with that game, which means more interesting decisions there. Every game feels different already. Plus, in the base game box, they have these cards that are scenarios for the game that increase the difficulty and give you just 1 or 2 very simple extra rules to follow that make the game more interesting and that actually makes it thematically feel like something new.
And I also love that it includes adversaries in these, I guess, historical nations that were coming in. So you can either have England, Prussia, Sweden, nations like that, and they modify the rules, how they operate, how they explore, expand, build, things like that. They make it more difficult. They change up the game a little bit, and then you can scale up the difficulty on each nation in ways to make the game harder if you want more of a challenge.
Oh man, I love that. I just love the personality that adds to the game, that these aren't just random settlers, but they're English settlers, which somehow feels more satisfying. Yeah. And the English are better at being terrible colonizers for one reason, and the Swedes are terrible for another reason. And I don't know, it's like as if this game didn't have enough theme already. Like, let's just add a little bit of personality to the mix. And on top of that, mechanically, the benefit is more variability and lots of ways to change up the difficulty for this game.
Yes.
I have won every game of this that I've played.
Yes.
Even at some of the higher difficulty levels, like I say higher, mid, like low to mid difficulty levels. There are 10 ranks, though, for difficulty. So there's just so much room to grow there that I'm just not really worried about the fact that I keep winning. And even when I win, it still feels like, whew, okay, we made it.
Right.
You know, even when you do really well, you feel like just one small misstep and things could have gone the other way. And I love that, but I also love knowing that if I ever do start to feel like this game is too easy, I have so many different knobs I can turn. It's not a problem.
Yeah, I think every game I've played, I've increased the difficulty just by like a smidge in some way, I think most of the time. And it feels about the same. So it's just one of those things that's nice. Like as I'm playing the game more, getting better, I'm increasing the difficulty. And it's keeping pace really well in like the way I'm getting better and how hard it is. So it's very, very satisfying.
I would go as far as to say, as this is one of the most replayable games out of the base box that I have ever seen.
Yeah, there's just a lot in the base box alone.
And it doesn't feel like fluff to me. It feels like I have barely scratched the surface of this. I got this game for Christmas. I have played it 9 times since Christmas, and I adore it. And I feel like I have messed with maybe a quarter of that extra stuff. And even if I had played all of it at this point, all of it is so replayable from game to game that it wouldn't matter. Mm-hmm. This is an incredible value, in my opinion. But that said, there is also an expansion available for this game called Branch and Claw. And we're not going to do a full review of that here, but a friend of ours, Will, who helped review the Star Realms Frontiers, if you remember that episode, he also got this game for Christmas and pretty much immediately bought the expansion because that's just who he is. Mm-hmm. And I've played with it one time. You played with it
3 or 4 times.
I can say after my one play of it, I am amazed by how much it adds and how few rules are there to govern what's added to the game.
Right. It's an extension of a couple of good things as far as adding a couple of more things to manipulate on the board. It just feels like a couple of more dials to turn. And then once again, just adds more spirits, which interact with some of the new components and just adds a lot more playability.
Yeah, it's really nice because you can stop different portions of the board from ravaging on their turn, or you can up their defense, or basically you have different ways to damage and bolster the different areas on the board from turn to turn that the expansion adds. Plus it adds 2 new spirits, and it adds some beasts that roam around the board and an event deck. And all of that's very cool, in addition, of course, to the new powers and fear cards that it adds, which are great. It's not necessary at all.
No. This is a solid game just by itself.
Absolutely. If you are worried about whether you should pick up both at the same time, definitely do not pick up both. Definitely pick up Spirit Island, try it, get a lot of plays out of it, and just explore what's there in the box because there's so much to explore. And when you're ready, or if you're ready to add just a little bit more, then pick up this expansion. Because it's only, at most online stores that I've seen, it's like $25 or $30. I don't know what the MSRP is, but you can find it for that price most places. And that's an impressive amount of content in there for that amount of money.
Yeah, it just adds a lot. It's just more of the thing. If you like it, you'll probably love the expansion.
Yes, absolutely. And that's not even counting that expansion that hit Kickstarter last year, which I haven't looked into deeply, but I know it added like 10 new spirits, which is ridiculous.
That blows my mind.
Oh, man, it really does. I can't imagine getting to the point where I need all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 100% going to get it at some point. But for now, I am very, very happy with what I've got. I still don't own the first expansion, and that's fine. So much replayability in the box, so much to explore here.
So how did you feel about playing it solo? Because both of us have played it with other people and by ourselves.
So I really enjoy the solo experience. I do not typically enjoy playing multiple characters in a game, and that is what this game does. I mean, it bills itself as a solo game. It's incredibly popular among the solo community. I mean, this game hit number 2 on the top 100 solo games list on BGG this year, which is mind-blowing. But realistically, the solo rules are 3 or 4 sentences in the rulebook, because all they're telling you to do is play with one or more spirits. You can play with just one spirit in this game. And actually, that's what the solo rules in the rulebook tell you to do. They just tell you to change 1 or 2 little things about the rules so that you can target yourself and things like that. But you play with one map tile and one spirit, and that's the solo game. But most of the places that I've checked online, people are saying that the best way to play it is with multiple spirits. And so I just started from the beginning playing with 2. You tried playing it with 1.
I did it, one game just playing with one of the map tiles and one spirit. Because typically you play with a corresponding amount of tiles to players you have, or spirits, I should say. Playing this game with others first and then going down, my first solo game I played with 2 spirits. And it wasn't quite what I expected. It was much more overwhelming than I was, I guess, expecting just based on past experiences. But yeah, it is a brain burner if you're handling 2 spirits at a time.
Yeah, so that's the only way I've tried playing this. I just thought that playing with one spirit would be a little bit too one-dimensional.
I don't know if it's one-dimensional. I guess it kind of is. The tension is definitely sky high with one because you don't have another spirit to kind of shore up your weaknesses because all the spirits have strengths and weaknesses. Yeah, it feels like the margin of error is somehow even smaller with one spirit. And my guess would be you could be hosed by bad card draw a little bit more so with a single spirit.
And I would have to imagine that depending on what spirit you picked, it would be almost impossible to win.
Right.
I mean, if you were playing with the Bringer of Dreams and Nightmares, for instance, who can't get people off of the board.
Yeah, I would think you just lose.
I would think you just lose, yeah.
I played with, what is it? Something of Rampant Growth.
A spread of Rampant Green.
Right, that's what it is. And so that one, it worked decently when I was playing just because you can spread out so fast and you have ways to kind of cancel out things. Yeah, I would imagine some spirits really fare poorly.
Yeah, I would imagine that's true. And so I just started by playing with 2 because actually everything that I had seen on Facebook groups and things like that, people were saying, start with playing with 2, don't even bother with 1. And when you're ready, work your way up to 3 or 4.
Ooh.
Man, after having played with 2, I absolutely will never play with 3 or 4 spirits.
Yeah, no, I don't think I would do that either.
No, this is a very involved game in terms of how much you have to think through on your turn. I mean, rules-wise, people have said that this is a rules-heavy game. I think you have to qualify that by saying for a co-op.
Mm-hmm.
Most co-ops aren't quite this heavy, I suppose, but I don't know. I don't find the rules to be a problem at all. They're excellent player aids in this game, and everything's so thematic that I don't have a problem with that. But there are so many variables to think through if you're playing a multiplayer game and just managing one spirit. If you're playing with 2 spirits at the same time, you have to think about interactions between the 2. You have to think through a strategy that works for both of them, and you've got nobody else there with you to share the mental load. And for me, that makes this the heaviest solo game in my collection.
Right, yeah, because to me, I wouldn't say that this is a rules-heavy game.
No.
But there is so much to think through. It definitely takes a lot of time to, your turns are going to be heavy and long, and it's not because there's a lot of rules to contemplate. It's just because there's a lot of choices to make.
There are, and I am not a headache-prone guy at all, but after most of the games I have played, I have needed to take an Advil, which it is, I know that sounds like an exaggeration, but I'm really not. It really puts my head through the ringer, and I've got Mage Knight. Mm-hmm. I've played Mage Knight I don't know how many times, and that game is notoriously heavy. And it really is.
Mm-hmm.
But I consider this to be the heavier game in terms of actually playing it and thinking through the strategies for the game, which speaks to how rich it is.
Right. And like that's one of the things I love about the game too, because I mean, I would assume probably most times you're playing the game, you're choosing a different spirit combination. And that's going to mean that you're going to have to think through things in a new way that you hadn't before previously. And it's a lot to consider.
It is a lot to consider. I still find it to be amazingly fun. Like, I love playing this game just as much as a solo game as with other people, in the same way that I like playing the City of Kings, you know?
Yeah.
City of Kings is so good for me because there's so much going on in the game, so much strategy to how you build your character, and there's just a lot to think through from turn to turn. I love that about both of these games, but they're heavy for me in the same way. I enjoy when I play City of Kings multiplayer that there's somebody else there to share the load. In Spirit Island, when you play multiplayer, one of the extra difficulties you have to contend with is that it's very difficult to alpha gamer this game because there's just too much to think through.
Yes.
You know, you're the only one at the table who is an expert on what your character can do well.
Right.
And that means then you can think through your stuff all day long, but you're reliant on other players communicating well with you about what powers they have available, what their innate abilities are, making sure that everybody's keeping track of their own stuff, that adds to the difficulty of the game in a multiplayer setting in a way that's mitigated in solo play. You know,
Right.
when I'm playing solo, I'm in total control of the strategy. I know what's there. The problem is there's just extra stuff to keep in my head. And I've had turns that last, 10, 15 minutes because I'm like, okay, let me do the math on this card combination here versus this one. And that can be really satisfying, but you have to be the kind of person who enjoys that.
Right.
And you have to be willing to set aside the time for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I was surprised. I mean, it's one of those things that I don't actually remember how long my solo playthroughs took because they kept getting interrupted, but I guess they felt longer to me. I don't know if they actually were than playing it with other people. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, for me, it's easily a couple of hours if I'm going to play this as a two-spirit game. I imagine it would be shorter if you were playing with one, but maybe not that much shorter.
It was definitely shorter for me, but I think I can easily get tripped up by lots of choices or lots of, I guess, options to consider. And so having the two spirits really slows me down. It can be hard for me to move on and just kind of let go of analyzing every option.
That's just something you'll want to consider for this game. It is a very heavy, very thinky game. On the other hand, I have found it very satisfying thematically, for instance, to play with two spirits because, one game I decided I was going to play with Ocean's Hungry Grasp and River Surges in Sunlight. The Water Bros are going to take on all of the settlers together.
Right.
Or the Bringer of Dreams and Nightmares and Shadows Flicker Like Flame together. I don't know, it just feels like, for me, that enriches the experience, as dumb as that is. Just being able to create thematic pairs like that and being able to discover the different ways that the spirits interact with one another is so fun for me that it makes this a fantastic solo experience.
Yeah, it was heavy and it was long, but it was great.
Yeah, I absolutely see why this has gotten the accolades it has from the solo community, because from my perspective, it is one of the most compelling solo experiences out there, and maybe a top 3 in my collection. That's probably tipped my hand a little bit here, but let's sum up like we usually do by talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly for this game. And for me, the good for this game is almost everything about it.
Right. The core design is just rock solid to me. How much replayability is in it. Everything's produced well. I don't know. I just love the spirits. It ends up being thematic, way more thematic than I would have imagined with just looking at the game board. Yeah, I really, really love it.
The amount of strategy, the amount of thought, the feeling of growth and change over the course of the game and from turn to turn, the drama that you feel, the excitement. I mean, like I said from the beginning, it looks like an abstract game when you set it up, but because of the flavor on the cards and the flavor of your spirit, I find that I'm sitting here at the table sweating it out trying to figure out what to do on this turn about the invaders, and the wooden pieces and the abstract look disappear for me in a way that I'm like, how can I get these little Dahan huts moved into this region and so they can rise up and beat their oppressors? It feels so rich and exciting. And honestly, it feels like there's nothing else out there like this. Not just thematically, but in terms of the kind of play that you have, the cadence of the turns and of the game as a whole. There's nothing out there like this, because most co-op games to me feel like this relentless onslaught from the AI and you just managing things from turn to turn until you can finally pull everything together for one big completion at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it holds a really high tension. And I guess sometimes it can feel like an onslaught in this game, but I don't know, there's just so much tension in every single turn. It makes you feel powerful while maintaining that tension instead of just like you're barely holding them back at the door.
That's what, for me, separates this game. That feeling of being overwhelmed and feeling incredibly powerful at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that added to the growth that you experience as a character over the course of the game and how familiar you as a player become with that spirit and with the strategy that you've built for yourself. Everything about it is just so good. In the bad category for me, I guess the only thing I would put here is the mental load that you have to take on as a solo player.
Yeah.
I love the solo experience for this game, but there's just no denying that it's not going to be for everybody.
And it's one of those games that I would still in the end pull this game out more so than a lot of other games. But knowing what's in store for me mentally would keep it on the shelf a couple of times, at least, just because I know it's going to be exhausting.
There are plenty of nights when I look at this on my shelf and I'm like, it's just not tonight. You know, tonight's a Welcome To night or a Star Realms night. And that's fine. Those games are excellent in their own right. But when the right night comes along, when I've got a little bit of extra brain space and a little bit of extra time, there is nothing else out there like this. And it's just so good. And for me, nothing goes in the ugly category for this game at all. Not at all. This is a brilliant design. I cannot believe that this comes from a designer who hasn't designed anything else, as far as I can tell, on Board Game Geek. This is a marvel. It's an amazing solo experience, an amazing multiplayer experience, and that's why this is a game that definitely deserves the stamp of approval. I love it. It is a top 10 solo game, maybe top 5, possibly top 3 for me. I mean, that's how much I enjoy it at this point.
Yeah, I don't really have a ranking for it, but it's an amazing game, and I just love it.
And so this is going to be a game that we give the stamp of approval to. We have not given out one of these in a while, but that's how you know we mean it. We really love this game. If you have not tried Spirit Island for some reason, don't wait as long as we did. Go check it out now. It's back in print, as far as I can tell. It's relatively easy to get. Get your hands on it, give it a try, and when you're ready, check out the expansion too. But just kick that can down the road a little bit because there's so much to enjoy in the base game box.
Absolutely.
And that's all we've got for you this episode. If you like this show and you want to find other good podcasts about board games, check out the Dice Tower Network. That's a network that we're a part of that's put on by the podcast that helped to get us into gaming called the Dice Tower. You can find other great shows in that network by going to dicetower.com. So give it a try. You might find your next favorite show there. Also, if you haven't followed us on Facebook and Instagram yet, you should do that because we post pictures on there of new games that we're playing or different giveaways that you can enter. So be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want a micro badge for your Board Game Geek profile, send me a message. I'm happy to spot you the 8 Geek Gold it takes to get one so you can show your love for the show. Just reach out to me anytime and I'll get that taken care of for you. And that's all we've got for this episode. Until next time, I'm Brandon Waite.
And I'm Carter Mackey.
And this is Solosaurus.